July 2014, Boston, Massachusetts. Their uncle was the last missing piece of the family puzzle. Their extended family had never been close, but after Sarah and Jeffrey's parents died 2 months ago, they thought for sure their reclusive uncle would at least crawl out of whatever rock he was under to attend their parents' funeral. But no, there was no sign of him. He had been told by email about the car accident that made his niece and nephew at 18 and 20 respectively adult orphans. In fact, email was the only form of communication that Uncle Charlie still used. Over the years, Charlie had grown increasingly paranoid and isolated. He was a pretty standard survivalist type with a penchant for government conspiracy theories that occasionally involved a UFO or two. Sarah had more respect for her uncle's way of thinking than her older brother Jeffrey, who saw him as a crackpot, and an unsociable one at that. He had a P.O. box that he rarely checked, but the only other way to reach him was his new email address that he insisted was completely safe and triple encrypted, whatever that meant. When the siblings had emailed their reclusive uncle to tell him about the death of their parents, they were surprised to find that after a token offering of sympathy and sentiment, their uncle said that he would merely try to make it to the funeral of his own brother and sister-in-law. Whether he tried to attend or not, he certainly failed to actually show his face. Being the elder of the two, there were several documents given to Jeffrey by the lawyer who managed the will and the estate of their late parents. At least a couple of the documents required their uncle's signature for anything to move forward, without adding months of additional headaches to the process. "How long has it been since he responded?" asked Sarah. "Uncle Charlie, I mean." She sat at their dining room table, eating soup that still simmered from the microwave. Her older brother didn't look up as he sat across from her, reading a tattered community college textbook. "It's been a week since we last heard from him," Jeffrey said, trying to hide his concern. He used his fingers to brush his curly hair behind his ears. "In fact, the email I got from him, I actually only found after searching my spam folder. That crackpot emails so many people about his conspiracy theories, it makes sense that servers would start filtering him out as spam. Although, I bet he had no way of knowing that his crazy antics had now branded him as a spammer." Jeffrey put down his textbook and grabbed a tablet on the armchair behind him. After a few minutes, with Jeffrey's sardonic face lit up by the device, he said, "Still no response, Sarah. Actually, you know what? It looks like I got a mailer demon from him this morning. His email hasn't changed, so his email service must have gone down. And I bet no one told him. Maybe it will be up by the weekend, and he will get back to us then, Jeff," replied Sarah. "This is bull," grunted Jeffrey. "He misses the funeral. He's been absent his whole life from everything important in our lives, and now he doesn't even respond at all. Email was the one thing that stupid misanthrope insisted he was good at, but he seems to be relying on a crappy service and doesn't even realize it." "Give me the tablet," said Sarah. "Why?" asked Jeff. "It's pointless. We can do this process without him." "Just let me take a look." Sarah snagged the tablet from her brother before lounging in the adjacent armchair. It had been a while since he had responded, but Sarah wanted to see the exact wording of the last email they did receive from him. She began to read Charlie's email from a week ago out loud. It said, "Jeffrey and Sarah, as I said, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry I have not been around more. You have to understand, though, I have stumbled upon certain things that, if I told you what they were, you would call me insane. I'm telling you both, though. I've been using my largest telescope and only here at Mount Gambrill, near Frederick, Maryland, Can I see what astronomers around the world are being silenced about? Something has changed in the stars. Something has awakened, and it's going to affect all human technology. Even with my encryption process, emails may no longer be safe soon. In fact, I believe emails may be the gate that they're using to enter our world. Do not come find me, Charlie. See, said Jeff. What did I tell you? It's more self-delusional, self-important, paranoid bullcrap. That's our uncle you're talking about, said Sarah. Uncle or not, he needs to be in a padded cell, not some cabin where he only communicates on a shaky Wi-Fi behind some psycho firewall. Jeff stood up and touched Sarah on the shoulder. Look, sorry, I'm not trying to bash him so much. I just think he's using his mental illness as an excuse to retreat from our family's tragedy instead of actually dealing with it. I know, said Sarah, wiping away a tear. But whether it's to get him to sign off on the attorney stuff, or just to make sure he hasn't killed himself, we need to go see Uncle Charlie. Sarah and Jeffrey had been driving for what felt like forever. They visited Maryland pretty rarely, and fixing the air conditioner in the Ford Focus they shared never seemed like a high priority to Jeff before. He now found himself continually regretting his frugality as they made their way through a very hot and unforgivingly humid Maryland, with the windows rolled down. Sarah's GPS had offered several routes to get them to Frederick, and she now wondered if any were less likely to make her feel queasy. She was already easily carsick, but the changing pressure and mountainous terrain was too much for her. Their uncle's cabin was in the heavily wooded slopes of Mount Gambrill, the outlier of the Catoctin Mountains that wandered off and now loomed over the city of Frederick. Mount Gambrill. It was a place Maryland folklore knows as a haven of ancient evil, a sort of prison of older, darker entities. Frederick was known to locals and travelers as a haunted city full of memory and decay. Even in the heat and humidity, Sarah felt a chill run through her spine as they drove up Market Street. Shutters slammed, closed, and locals gave them wary, furtive looks from their creased brows. Frederick had become known as a place where people who had lost everything went to forget their memories, to forget their pain, to forget themselves. Before you can start a new life, first you must undo an old one. That had become a sort of unofficial motto of the town. After speaking to a convenience store owner, trying to figure out exactly where their uncle's cabin was based off their foggy memory and the GPS's vague directions, the withered, almost insect-like man said to Sarah, "Yes, ma'am. That will get you to the old Redding estate, and by the sounds of it, that's the exact same cabin that your uncle will be living at nowadays." He pointed at a map he handed to Sarah as Jeff listened with suspicion. "But I've got to tell you kids a thing or two. Bad things happen to people who go up Mount Gambrill. You understand me?" "No offense, sir," said Jeffrey, "but we're not going to get murdered by our uncle. We just need to find him." "Well, I guess then," started the man, taking off his cap to scratch his head. "Maybe I can't stop you from driving up the hill, but I've got to tell you this. Keep your wits about you. You hear me now? It's not that people don't come back. It's that they come back changed. Something about Mount Gambrill leaves people somehow different." "All right, man," said Jeff wryly. "Thanks for the heads up and the diagram." Jeff grabbed Sarah by the sleeve, encouraging her to get back in the car, even though it looked like she had more to ask. The old man seemed to stare at them as they drove away. "What a creeper," said Jeff. Sarah didn't respond, but to her, It looked like the old man was scared for them. They continued their trek through Market Street, onto the highway, and finally up a beaten road, towards their reclusive uncle's cabin. It wasn't quite sunset, but the thick fog and cloud cover made everything pitch black out, except for the occasional flashes of light from a brewing thunderstorm. It wasn't long before they found themselves pulling up the driveway. A driveway so long it felt like a road in and of itself. There, nestled in the gently sloping woods, was Charlie's cabin. The lights were off, though. Either he was asleep already, or had lost power thanks to all the storms passing through. After parking, both siblings found themselves just sitting in relative quiet in the still-running car. "I think maybe," began Sarah, adjusting her blue hoodie, "maybe we should just leave. This feels weird now that we're here." "Don't be dumb," scoffed Jeff. He opened up the car door and jogged briskly through the rain up to the front door, knocking twice and ringing the doorbell, which seemed to work fine. Sarah eventually caught up, with her arms held in front of her, both out of nervousness and because of the oddly cold rain. It took a few moments, but the front door creaked open. A tall, thin man wearing a brown sports jacket and khakis opened the door. His shirt was white and his face was clean-shaven, quite different from the buzz-cut, sporting, cargo pant-wearing Charlie of their youth. Sarah had only remembered him with his big mountain beard before. Jeff's facial expression gave away to Sarah that he also was surprised to see their paranoid survivalist uncle now smiling and looking rather suburban. "Well, hello there, two." Their uncle smiled, a big toothy smile. "This is certainly a surprise. Please, come in. You're getting drenched." The place was different than they had remembered. Charlie used to have paintings of ships and trains. They had all been replaced by photographs and pictures of stars and constellations. One thing that was still the same, as they remembered, was the dozen or so locks and bolts on the door, as well as the bars on the windows. Like a prison of fear, Jeff thought. Charlie turned on a quaint-looking lamp in the small living room. Come to think of it, Sarah hadn't noticed a single light that was on in the whole house before, from what they could see, despite their uncle showing no indications that he had been resting. "Sorry to come unannounced," said Sarah. "Were you sleeping, Uncle Charlie?" "Oh, no," said Charlie. "I was on the back porch, stargazing. You know how much I enjoy my astronomy." Jeff shook his head and silently remarked on how crazy Charlie still was. Good luck stargazing in the middle of a storm, he mused silently to himself. They spoke for a while with their long-lost uncle, who seemed to be in remarkably good spirits, especially considering his brother had just died. They had never pictured him as a calm man, so it was both refreshing and disturbing to see him so even-keeled. "And that's why it's so important that you sign these documents," said Jeff, holding up a folder full of papers after giving a short but prepared speech. "We just want to have all this behind us." "I completely understand," said Charlie, his hands folded evenly on his lap. "I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it to the funeral. You see, I was sick, but I'm better now, and even though this terrible tragedy has occurred, I have a feeling that things are going to get a lot better from now on." Sarah sighed in relief. It was nice to hear her uncle say something that wasn't completely delusional and paranoid. "To be honest," she said, "we were worried about you. You sounded like you were in a rough place." Sarah smiled. "We half expected you to open the door pointing a shotgun at our face." "Oh," said Charlie, smiling warmly. "I certainly have made a mess of things by always being so anxious before, haven't I?" "It's all right," said Jeff. "I'm sorry to ask this, but have you been taking the medicine again that you were on years ago?" "Well," said Charlie, standing up and walking towards the kitchen, "I started taking a different medicine. I have a different doctor now. My new treatments are far more effective." "Do you drive far?" asked Sarah, wrenching her neck towards the kitchen. "I mean, no offense, but you're out here in the woods. Can't be a lot of doctors." "It probably sounds unusual," said Charlie, "but we actually correspond via email. You'd be surprised how much you can get done just over email." Sarah began. "Speaking of email specifically, you sounded pretty scared and worried in that last email. We actually got a Mailor demon from you afterwards." "Can I offer you something?" said Charlie, his voice coming from behind the open refrigerator. "You must be famished after a car trip from Boston." "I'm fine," said Sarah. "Just something to drink," said Jeff. "Thanks, Uncle Charlie." There was a sudden boom, and then a crash. A tree nearby got struck, Sarah noted, as she breathed a bit heavier to catch the adrenaline. "You get used to the storms here," said Charlie. "Something about being this close to the storm clouds. There's an electricity in the air around here. It's one of the reasons they call Mount Gambrill Tempest Mountain. Here's your water, Jeffrey." "Thanks, Charlie," said Jeff, taking the glass. "Speaking of electricity, what's your Wi-Fi password? I need the Wi-Fi to call my girlfriend, and I'm getting no phone signal out here." "Of course, Jeff. Here, give me your phone. I'll enter the password for you." Jeff handed his uncle the phone as he took a sip of water. Jeff murmured in partial disgust. "Is there electricity in the water too, Uncle Charlie?" Sarah laughed uncomfortably at her brother. "Seriously, it tastes like drinking copper." "Ah, yes," said Charlie. "I'm afraid it's well water, and I've grown quite used to it. It may taste strange at first, but it'll do you no harm. Just a bit of hard water. You may even grow to enjoy it." They had stayed and talked with their uncle for a while, before he convinced them to stay there for the night, insisting that they could go over the papers in the morning, and that a good night's rest would be better than trying to make it back to Boston or finding some rundown motel in town. He offered Sarah the guest bedroom that was tucked away down the hall of the small home. Jeff had fallen asleep on the brown couch in the musky living room, and Sarah imagined that he had drifted off to sleep relatively easily, judging by how much he was yawning towards the end of their conversation with their reclusive relative. The exhaustion of the trip and the stress must have caught up to him. Sarah found herself in the dark, claustrophobic guest room, still awake and shivering slightly despite the comfortable temperature. Everything felt different, and maybe it was just her memory, but she couldn't quite figure it out. "Electricity in the air," she thought. "Copper in the water. No phone signal except Wi-Fi from a shady third party. I never want to come back to this creepy place." After laying on the lumpy mattress in the guest bedroom and hearing the storm continue to rage on outside for another hour, she finally decided to go out to the living room where her brother was sleeping on the sofa. There wasn't much light to guide her way as she walked down the hallway, except for brief flashes of lightning. Finally, she felt the couch in front of her and jostled her brother. "Jeff," she said. "Sorry, but can we talk for a minute? I can't sleep." She poked at him again and realized her brother wasn't there. It was merely a bundle of sheets and blankets bulked up on the couch. Sarah's heart dropped. She had walked past the bathroom before, and the light was off. The kitchen light was off, too. Where was Jeff? "There's nothing to be scared of," a voice came from a few yards behind her. In the dark, she could see what appeared to be the silhouette of her uncle. "We brought your brother to the basement." Sarah breathed heavily, with her fists clenched at her sides. "Who is we?" "We came from far away, Sarah, but we are your family." She could feel the face of her uncle speaking to her, even though she could not see the shape of it beyond an outline. "It's not just your Uncle Charlie anymore, Sarah. We're all inside here. We came to join with you and your kind. We use something that's sort of like Wi-Fi ourselves. Well, let's just say we piggyback off Wi-Fi." "Where is Jeff?" Sarah asked, taking several steps backward before she felt her leg hit the coffee table. "He's in the basement. The rest of the family is down there with him. They're doing an upgrade on him. We're using something you can think of as Wi-Fi." The figure began to step forward. She saw the silhouette walking towards her. There was nowhere behind her to run. Adrenaline coursing through her, she leapt forward at her uncle. Amazingly, he seemed to barely even stumble backward, despite Sarah throwing her entire frame at him. She felt him grab her wrists. His hands felt cold and scarily, like a snake. He was so incredibly strong that despite being an athlete, Sarah couldn't even budge from his grip. "Don't fight it, Sarah." She felt his breath on her face. It was cold and metallic, like copper or iron. "I fought it too, but it only makes it hurt worse. Once you join with them, nothing hurts anymore. It's like being with family." There was a brief flash of light behind Charlie. Then came the shuffling sound of footsteps, followed quickly by a hollow, fleshy clunk. Charlie keeled over, and behind him, lit by his own cell phone that he held, was Jeff, holding a long pipe in his other hand. "Let's go!" he yelled. "Sarah, run!" They raced together, guided by the light of Jeff's phone. Sarah looked behind her to see their uncle beginning to stand up again. They unlatched the bolts and locks of the front door as Charlie's footsteps grew louder behind them. "Hurry!" cried Sarah. "I'm trying!" They ran out the front door at last. Without looking back, Sarah heard the creak of the front door again. A voice bellowed behind them, deep and loud, as if legions in unison.
"You will return to this place."
Jeff turned the wheel hard after starting the engine. Sarah locked the car door, shaking feverishly, her car sickness flaring up as Jeff finished a frantic U-turn and began flooring it down the gravel driveway. At the end of the driveway, it looked like water was glistening in the headlights. The glistening turned to slithering with so much speed and poor lighting. Sarah couldn't be sure, but it looked like snakes or an octopus. There were tentacles, she was sure. In a flash, they drove over whatever it was and did not stop for miles and miles. They left Mount Gambrill and Frederick, Maryland, on what felt like the longest car trip imaginable. Jeff told Sarah about how there were bodies that grabbed him in the dark and muffled him with cold reptilian hands. He explained how they dragged him to the basement and stuck what looked like a plastic tube into his ear. He spoke about feeling a cold metallic liquid beginning to touch his ear before he finally managed to burst free from the hands that grasped him before racing upstairs, grabbing a pipe that he had luckily found in the basement to swing at his attackers. He could not say how many people or beings there were, but the hair on Sarah's arm stood up when he described how he could feel them slithering, panting, and even drooling, although he could not see their faces. One thing his brother seemed convinced of was that there were at least 2 others in that house, besides themselves and their uncle. "No one will believe us," Jeff said to Sarah. They were about halfway home when they stopped at a gas station. Sarah showed Jeff the green goo that was on the tires. "Don't touch it," she said. Weeks had passed since then, disturbing night, and the siblings were back in the home they grew up in and inherited in Boston. They spoke of that traumatic night rarely and in hushed tones, not quite sure who to tell or even how to describe it. Jeff seemed to grow increasingly quiet and reclusive. The memory of the horrific and inexplicable events clearly had disturbed him deeply. Sarah convinced him to try therapy, and Jeff agreed to make an appointment the following week. He began to grow paranoid and restless, claiming that he was worried about poor security of the Wi-Fi they used in their home, and even shared fears regarding the use of emails given everything that had happened. Finally, a day came when Sarah did not hear from Jeff at all, and he seemed to not even leave his room. She knocked on the door, and after a few minutes there was Jeff, smiling warmly and dressed uncharacteristically in a nice polo and jeans. "I found the new Wi-Fi service," he said, smiling widely. "Sarah, I think we should try it."